Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Staples, and I'm the guest speaker this morning, looking at the BBC website or possibly surfing the net for porn. This is a consistent theme. This is Opera Europa in Vienna, and some of the wonderful people, young people here, are armed with cameras, and they are photographing you now. So unless you want to appear as a non-observer in my next presentation, pay attention. What this slide does, it looks at opera houses over 350, 400 years. And we are all familiar with the very traditional horseshoe-shaped opera house. The absolute culminating example of it is here in the Staatsopera in Vienna. It's the classic form of an opera house, and it's been the form of an opera house for 400 years, going back to Italy in 1637, right up to... one of the other problems is we're now running on a previous version of the presentation, and there should be another line there under 2008 and Oslo. It should say 2011 and Linz. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see this very linear development of opera houses. And what about other forms? Where have people tried to break out of the traditional form and put opera into other spaces? Graham Vick in Birmingham in England specialises in going into warehouses, factory buildings, industrial buildings, found spaces. And I'm going to conclude the presentation this morning by talking about a project, a possible project in Lucerne in Switzerland, Salle Modulable, which may appear in the future as a very innovative new type of space to present opera and music theatre. Italy, it says here, demolished due to recurring fires. The 17th, 18th and 19th century were a wonderful era for theatre architects and consultants like me, because the average theatre building burnt down every 12 years and needed to be rebuilt. This stopped, sadly, with the invention of electricity. When theatres were lit by gas and candles, they burnt down regularly. Electricity was not a good invention. This is King Gustav III of Sweden, known to Swedes. Are there any Swedes here? Good. As good King Gustav. There are 3 Swedes at the back. Good King Gustav, a great patron of the arts. He founded the opera company, he founded the ballet company, and he built an opera house. And King Gustav loved going to the opera. For the first 10 years after the opera house was built, he really enjoyed going to the opera and masquerades, masked balls. Unfortunately, at one of the masquerades, he was assassinated in his opera house. And Verdi's Un Bellaro Maschero, the masked ball, is the story of King Gustav. I told this story about King Gustav in New York at a conference about 3 years ago, and at the cocktail party afterwards, one of the Swedish delegation came up to me and said, "I am the great, 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 great granddaughter of one of the assassins." Now, we've all read Stieg Larsson and we've read the Wallander novels, and we know that the Swedes are basically violent people, which is why they're in a corner at the back. But in the arts world, there is a lady who is the great, great, great granddaughter of the assassin of King Gustav. This is the opera house that Gustav built. It lasted for 100 years or so and then was replaced by a new opera house. What's important about this is the position of the opera house in the city. It's right in the middle of the city, in front of the Royal Palace, opposite the Parliament building. Look at the position of the opera house here in this city. It's a statement about how important opera, concerts, culture are in the life of the community. Scala Milan is, if you look at the drawing on the left, it's the classic horseshoe-shaped opera house. Look at the picture on the right. The audience is stacked up in many, many levels. From the highest level there, you can basically look down and see the orchestra. You cannot see very much of the action on stage in this sort of opera house. It's possibly as important to be seen as a member of the audience as to be able to see the performance. A stylized drawing of the opera house. At the bottom, the plan, huge stage, side stages, orange playing area, paler orange as the orchestra pit, and then the horseshoe shape. And at the top, the plan, the big stage, fly tower, section through the auditorium, multiple levels of seating. The Royal Opera House in London, the first theatre, like Central Europeans, we regularly burnt down our theatres. This one lasted till 1808, was destroyed by fire, replaced only a year later in 1809, burnt down about 40 or so years later. And this is the current opera house, which we've managed to avoid burning down so far. And again, picture on the right, the classic horseshoe opera house shape. That was Europe. We're going to cross the Atlantic now to Brazil. And Brazil is a huge country, 220 million people, they think. Famed for perhaps the Amazon River, and a town which many of us have possibly heard about, Manaus, in the middle of the Amazon, at the junction of the Rio Negro and the Amazon rivers. The Rio Negro, the Black River, the Amazon, a brown river. The two rivers come together in Manaus. And it's called the meeting of the waters, and you can see the two rivers come together. They're completely different colors. They don't mix the water for about 10 kilometers. This demarcation continues. And this is where the piranha comes back into the story. I've only ever been fishing twice in my life, and this was the second occasion, and I caught a piranha in the Amazon River in Manaus. Manaus is in the middle of the rainforest. This is the city in about 1865. It was tiny. It had a population of a few thousand people. And then there was a boom. They discovered rubber in the Amazon rainforest, the plants, the rubber plants. And from about, it tells you the period, 1850 to 1920, Manaus boomed. It was one of the wealthiest cities on the planet. In terms of wealth, it rivaled New York, Paris, London. Manaus was the first city in Latin America to be lit by electricity. It was extraordinary, and they invested in public buildings, all sorts of things, until in about 1910, the economy crashed. One of the things they did in the late 1880s, 1890s, was they opened the Teatro Amazonas. And I've shown you some of the world's beautiful European opera houses. This comes at the end of a golden era of opera house building. And the architect, an Italian architect by the wonderful name of Celestial Scaradino, designed the opera house in Manaus, and fundamentally he got it right. It's very small, it's about 780 seats. It is a beautiful, beautiful opera house. For 20 years after it opened, they had visiting artists. Caruso played here. If you've seen that, I can't remember the name of the director's film about Latin America, it features in it. Internally, this is the foyer. The foyer, to go into the foyer today, you have to wear slippers. You're not allowed to wear your regular shoes to avoid damaging the wood. And internally, it is still used today. I've been there. I saw concerts. I saw a jazz concert there. It is possibly, if I had to have a top 10 of theatre buildings around the world, this would be in the top 2 or 3. It opened in 1896. Shortly after that, the devious British stole the Brazilians' rubber plants, planted them in Malaysia and Indonesia, where it was much cheaper to produce rubber, and the economy of Brazil and Manaus collapsed almost overnight. Manaus was the first city in Latin America to be lit by electricity. About 15 years later, they turned off the lights. This opera house closed in about 1912, 1913, and was lost for 90 years. They simply closed the doors and walked away from it. Fortunately, the government revived it, and it's now in active use again. But come up to date, Glyndebourne, the opera house in Lewis, privately run, privately financed opera house, the classic horseshoe shape. The new opera house in Oslo, opened a few years ago, the classic shape. Bang up to date, this is the newest opera house in the world, opened the 11th of April, just over a month ago in Linz, about an hour from here. Many of these are our projects. The one in Manaus I was not involved in, that was before my time. This was one of our projects. It's a stunning addition to the city. I leave you to yourselves to judge the quality of the architecture. Internally, it is the classic opera house, a massive building, huge rehearsal rooms, workshops, lots of technology. It's essentially a factory for the production of opera. I'm going to very quickly do the same sort of analysis for concert halls. If we go back, people didn't build concert halls. Concerts took place in rooms like this, in palaces, in mansions. And the Shoebox Concert Hall, of which the Musikverein, that I was in last night, is a perfect example. Parallel side walls, high ceiling, big volume. But interesting. Okay. There should be another strip down here. Could you just press next on the computer and see if it won't play? No, okay. There should be a list of other halls on the left-hand screen here, which starts with the Berlin Philharmonie, where people have started to experiment with different forms of concert hall. One of the earliest rooms that was used for concerts, Leeds Town Hall in the United Kingdom, 1858. Look at the date on that. And, I build theatre buildings, and everybody complains that they're always late and over budget. Apparently 150 years ago, they were also complaining that there was much criticism because of the cost of the building. So nothing much has changed in 150 years. The Musikverein, 1870, one of the things that's encouraging is that the Musikverein is the best concert hall in the world. But the important thing is it follows Leeds. Leeds Town Hall in the north of England came first, and the Musikverein follows. The Shoebox Concert Hall, plan at the bottom, conventional shape, very high flat ceiling in section. A more recent hall, the new hall in Stavanger in Norway, follows that form. This is the Sage in Gateshead. Norman Foster designed this building on the banks of the River Tyne. Two halls, Shoebox Concert Hall. Very nice, clean piece of architecture, clean piece of design. Sounds wonderful. Acoustically, it's wonderful. Does it set your heart racing? There is a second room here, a recital room, 400-seat, audience stacked. This is a very, very tight, focused room. Of the two rooms in the building, this is probably the most it is certainly the most dynamic and most exciting. Now they have appeared. So in 1963, Germans, Hans Scharoun in Berlin designed the Philharmonic Hall, Philharmonie, and people have started then subsequently to experiment with what have become known as the Vineyard concert halls. Here's Simon Rattle, the Berlin Phil, on platform in and the Philharmonie. And this is the sort of characteristics of the Vineyard Hall. Orange platform, audience surrounding the platform and stacked up like a wonderful vineyard. This is the Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, designed by Frank Gehry. The model on the left, the reality on the right. Walt Disney's widow, Mrs. Disney, decided to create a memorial to Walt Disney. If there was one man in the 20th century who did not need a memorial, it was possibly Walt Disney, but who's to say, and gave the money to build the Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles. Frank Gehry was appointed as architect, Yasu Toyota was the acoustic consultant, we were the theatre consultants for this building. An extraordinarily attractive piece of architecture. Inside is as extraordinary. If you appoint Frank Gehry as your architect, you are not going to get a conventional pipe organ. On the right is Gehry's interpretation of a classical pipe organ. Nobody knows. Nobody knows where Gehry's inspiration comes from, but I have my suspicions. Please never tell him I've shown this slide. So what we're saying, this last few minutes have been a sort of look backwards, and to say that in both opera houses and concert halls we've had a very linear development. And at the bottom, really only in the last few tens of years, have we seen people breaking out of the mold and experimenting and trying alternative ways of staging. So what about the future? Where are we today? And what I'd like to do is just spend a couple of minutes talking about the challenges and opportunities, and then 4 pointers to the future. One of the major challenges are the financial realities. Around the world, there is less money, whether it's government money, audience money, sponsor money. And our buildings, we have to find ways of generating more revenue out of the buildings and reducing the costs of running those buildings. And both are possible and achievable. Artistic innovation. Most of you work with artists all the time. There are people still playing in string quartets as they were at the time of Mozart, Haydn, Brahms, etc. But people are experimenting and innovating with the use of new media, new technologies. The performing arts themselves are actually changing. Skip over collaboration. Interpretation, surtitles. If you look at the statistics for performing arts attendance around the world, audiences are generally stable, if in slight decline over a long period of time. The one art form where audiences have been growing is opera. And there are 2 reasons offered for this. One is we are an aging population and older people come to opera. One, because their interest grows, and 2, because they can afford it. The second reason given for the opening up or increasing audiences for opera are surtitles. Until 20 years ago, you had to know the plot of La Bohème, or you had to read a synopsis. Now you can see the words at the top of the stage or on your seat back surtitling. Technologies. There's a lot of change in technology. A lot of that is fairly ephemeral. Technology is always going to change. This laptop's at least 2 years old, so it's been obsolete for at least a year of that period. But we're seeing a growing interest in the use of projection in the performing arts, not just in performing arts, but also in architecture as well. Broadcasting. Everybody's aware of the Met Live broadcasts. The Met started broadcasting their operas on radio in the 1930s. They have continued ever since. They're now broadcasting in HD, I think the statistics, the Met reaches about 900,000 people a year in the Metropolitan Opera House in New York, and reaches about 4 or 5 million people through the Met casts into cinemas. Multiform theatres. Come back to that economic reality. A city like Vienna can have an opera house for opera, a concert hall for concerts, playhouses for drama, etc. You can have specialized theatres. Smaller theatres, and increasingly to promote the utility and use of theatres, people are looking and saying to designers like me, David, can you give us one theatre which can do everything? Now, the reality is you can't. If somebody stands in front of you and says, I can give you one theatre that will do everything, they're lying to you. I can give you a theatre that is very flexible, and this multi-form theatre is one way of doing it, where we actually change the form of the theatre, move the architecture of the building. I'll give a couple of examples. My final challenge and opportunity is the Middle East. The rest of the world is going broke. We have no economic growth. China and the Middle East are actually prospering. The growth of some of the Middle Eastern countries has been phenomenal. They are now turning their attention to arts and culture, and I'll give a couple of examples below. The 4 pointers to the future are 4 or 5. Final quick word on projection. On the right, it's Buckingham Palace. Our Queen celebrated her Diamond Jubilee last year with a rock concert in front of Buckingham Palace. And one of the groups asked to perform was Madness, who did a performance of My House in front of Buckingham Palace, with monumental projections on the front of the building. Projection technology is changing rapidly. The New World Center in Miami is the home for the New World Symphony Orchestra, a training orchestra established by Michael Tilson Thomas. It exists to give young artists the first opportunity. They've come out of one of the major conservatories of music, out of Juilliard School, Royal Academy, Royal College, or something like that. They want to work in an orchestra. The New World Symphony is that orchestra. It offers internships for students for 2 or 3 years to go and collaborate and work in Miami. They decided they needed a new building, a concert hall of about 780 seats, and appointed Frank Gehry as the architect. On the left, the building is fairly conventional by Frank Gehry's terms. It's a cube. It's very, very unusual. All of the complexity is inside these acoustic surfaces and sails. Each of them is a projection surface, and there are 14 high-definition projectors that can project onto those surfaces. You can project anything onto the surface. You can project the head of the conductor. You can project a soloist. You can project something themed in there. This is the room, 780 seats. Any sort of projected illusion is possible there. The building is wired in a second way. It is connected to Internet 2, the high-speed American academic internet, which allows online collaboration between musicians. A group of young musicians could be studying in Miami, having a masterclass online in real time with a maestro or a performer here in Vienna. They can collaborate and have an ensemble. The string section is in Australia, the brass section is in Miami, the wind section could be here in Vienna. Huge investment in Internet 2. Skype allows you to do almost the same thing virtually free of charge. A couple of years change. On the exterior of the building, on the left here of the glazed section, there is a 800 square meter projection screen. Every concert that is shown inside, you can pay, you can sit in air conditioning, you can hear it in a wonderfully acoustically perfect environment, or free of charge, you can go and sit in the park outside and watch it on the big screen. And there is a reality, as in all buildings, they can clear all of the seats out and you can do a banquet and make some money out of that, because you'll lose money on the cultural program. Second map, we're going to the Middle East now, and Oman is a small country, about 2.5 million population. Its capital city is Muscat, population of about 600,000. Oman is remarkable because of its ruler. Sultan Qaboos is the king, the sultan. He is passionate about music and classical music. He plays the pipe organ himself. In each of his palaces, he has a pipe organ, and on the payroll of the Royal Guard, there is a very nice Englishman called Ian Hockley, whose position is the royal organist. It is his job to go to the palaces and use and exercise the royal organs. Sultan Qaboos wanted to build a new theatre in Oman. He has his own symphony orchestra, so there is a symphonic music group there, but they also wanted a theatre that could be used for staged performances, for opera, ballet, musicals. And on the left, you see the plan of a classic shoebox concert hall. The blue is the musicians on the platform, but 1/3 of the room is movable. The concert enclosure can slide away into a rear stage, and on the right you see the same space reconfigured with a full stage, orchestra pit in front of it. On the left, the room is configured as a concert hall, on the right as a theatre. And this little model was made to explain to the client the concept that we take 1/3 of the room, simply slide it away into storage, and you can put a set on stage. The other thing that changes is the boxes at the front of the room. For a concert, obviously we want quite a wide opening, 18, 19 meters, to get the sound out. For opera ballet, we want a narrower proscenium opening, so those boxes at the front of the room can also move to change that opening. This is the finished building. This is October 2011. London Philharmonic Orchestra on stage with Yo-Yo Ma, a wonderful concert, and a huge Austrian Kleiss pipe organ behind. This is the same room 1 week later. The organ, concert shell enclosure has disappeared. You have a conventional stage, orchestra pit in front of it. And this sequence, if I do it properly, shows the gap as the concert shell starts to move back into its storage position. That piece of architecture, the concert shell with the organ, ceiling, it weighs about 600 tons. The transition, the move, takes 16 minutes to slide back from one position to another position. The finished building, top left at night. The lower photograph here is of the foyers. Those of you who've been to the Garnier Opera in Paris, the Staats Opera here, will recognize the fundamental form of the staircase, grand staircase coming up. Yes, it looks opulent. The only thing I can say is by Middle Eastern standards, this is pretty restrained. If this was Dubai, there'd be a lot more bling. This building has 5 entrances to it. There is a public entrance, there is a VIP entrance, There is the ministerial and ambassadorial entrance, and then we hit the royal entrance for members of the royal family, except Sultan Qaboos, who has his own entrance. And on the right, that is Sultan Qaboos's entrance. And he gets a recording of almost every event that takes place in the house. He gets the DVD of every event. I told you I'd bring you a riot. In February of this year, an American band appeared in the Opera House. I'm not going to reveal the name of them because I don't want to give them any further publicity. One of the members of the band had recently converted to Islam, and in the middle of their concert started to recite verses from the Quran. This caused massive offense. In Islam, the Quran does not have a musical accompaniment. It caused huge offense, and you can see there was a demonstration. I'd hesitate to call it a riot, but there was a demonstration on 2 or 3 successive Fridays outside the Opera House. Coming up the Gulf, this is the architecture studio, French architectural firm for the Bahrain National Theatre. It opened in November last year. It opened in November. It'll be completed in about another 2 months. Wonderful building standing on the water's edge. 1,000-seat auditorium inside. Move down the Gulf to Dubai, and in Dubai you are definitely into bling. On the left we have the Burj Al Khalifa, the tallest tower in the world. In the center you have their fountain, the biggest fountain in the world, and on the right, Dubai Mall, the biggest shopping mall in the world. Every word in Dubai has to end in est, E-S-T, biggest, fastest, largest, highest, etc. At the foot of that tower, we are currently planning with Emar, the developer, a new theatre, a flexible theatre. This is an artist's impression from my office of the theatre in theatre mode. It can accommodate about 2,000 people. Can have an orchestra pit, large or small, for a musical or an opera. It can take opera, ballet, musicals. But it can also be reconfigured as a concert hall as well. There is a third configuration. You can remove all of the seats on the lower level and use it for a big Arabic wedding banquet, 1,000 people at a banquet. I've looked at a lot of new buildings, but some of you have probably got old buildings and you're saying, well, okay, what can we do with heritage buildings? The Massey Hall in Toronto is 120 years old. It used to be home to the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, but about 30 years ago they moved to the Roy Thompson Hall, leaving Massey as a home for popular music, folk, jazz, and a lot of rock and roll. It's a huge venue, 2,800 seats. The existing building on the left, designed by an American architect who normally designed chapels and churches. And he got one thing absolutely right. The auditorium is wonderful. He forgot a couple of things like dressing rooms, foyers, and fire escapes. So about 3 or 4 years after it opened, these cast iron fire escapes appeared on the exterior to make the building safe. The building is 120 years old. It's not quite falling to pieces, but it needs a lot of work. And the picture on the right is an artist's impression of the building cleaned up. And behind, there's a piece of land which will be acquired, and we are proposing to build a 8-story building on it. The lower floors will be loading docks, dressing rooms, backstage accommodation, foyers on 2 floors, and then a music education, music development center above it. This is the building. You can see from this drawing, its design is inspired by a Methodist chapel or church, and it is absolutely a fabulous venue. Top right, there are 57 stained glass windows, rather beautiful stained glass windows in this building, almost all of which are covered up at the moment. You can't see them. Bottom right, the seating in the highest level, the gallery level, is original. The seats are 120 years old in the top tier. The seats downstairs, where you're sitting, they refer to as the new seats. The new seats are 63 years old. So this is a building in need of renovation. So I've been talking a lot about new buildings, but we shouldn't forget the role that old buildings with revitalization can play moving forward. Mario, there's an animation here. Can you click on it to get it to run?
Luzern hat den Anspruch, eine Musikstadt zu sein, aber eigentlich nicht wirklich über ein gutes Opernhaus verfügt. Also über einen Raum, in dem man Oper auf höchstem professionellen Niveau machen kann.
Can you fade the sound down and leave me on? Thank you. Take the sound right off now. Michael Hefliger is the director of the Lucerne Festival in Switzerland. The Lucerne Festival is one of the most successful classical music festivals in the world, probably. It's up in the top 4 or 5. And Michael, they've got a beautiful concert hall designed by Jean Nouvel. Michael wants to expand the festival into the field of music theatre and opera, but there is no suitable venue in Lucerne. So we started talking about this project, and Michael said, David, I don't want a conventional opera house. I don't want a horseshoe auditorium. I don't want a stage. I don't want an orchestra pit. And this dialogue went on for some months, and I said, Michael, you define your building entirely in negative terms. You don't want this, you don't want that. You don't want that. What do you want? To which the reply was, I don't know, but I'll recognize it when I see it. And he then said, what I want is a building that imposes no constraints on an artistic team, on a director, designer, composer, conductor. And I said, well, as soon as we build one wall, we've got a constraint. If we build 2 walls, you've got 2 constraints. So we spent some time discussing whether they should build anything or whether for the festival they should, like the Serpentine Pavilion in London, create a temporary structure every year. And you'll see I've appeared here as well at this point explaining this. So what has been developed is the concept of a very, very flexible room in which the floors can move, the walls can move. You can reconfigure it into almost any form that you want. And this is not an opera house for doing repertoire opera, different opera every night, opera and ballet alternating, but it is a room for experiment that you could use in a festival situation. And this is my last example, and I think this is the one. The project is stalled at the moment by disputes over funding, but I think if there are some pointers to the future in what I've shown you. The New World Symphony in Miami is an attempt at reinventing the concert hall, bringing in new technology, bringing in projection, bringing in collaboration. I think this building, Salle Modulable in Lucerne, will be a similar building for opera if it actually happens. I hope the last few minutes have been useful. The main reason I show this video, and I'm leaving it running now, is this is the only time in my life I will ever appear with Abbado, Boulez, Pollini, Pekka Salini, and I'm going to make the most of it. Thank you. And I'd be very happy, while we watch me and Boulez, to take any questions. Please.
Frank Horn from Switzerland. You talked somewhat scornfully about bling, as in the old days, but Art Nouveau exhibitions are more popular than ever. Just a few weeks ago, I was at the Palau de la Música in Barcelona. I found it marvelous. What's wrong with bling?
There is absolutely nothing wrong with bling. I'm here with my wife, and last night we went to the Musikverein, and the Musikverein is stuffed with Austrian bling. There's gold figurines, there's gold statuettes. It's a very good point. I think our theatre buildings actually have to offer people experiences which are different from the everyday. Whether that's bling or style or it's the architecture of Frank Gehry, we do a lot of work with Frank Gehry, we've done many buildings with him. Clients often say, if I have Gehry as my architect, he will add $10 million to the cost of the building. He will add 20 million to the fundraising, and his buildings draw in the audience. The reason I'm a bit down on bling today is I was in Dubai on Sunday and Monday of this week. I was in Bahrain on Tuesday, and it was 41 degrees and it wasn't raining outside. And then I came to Vienna and it was raining and cold, and I thought, why? Dubai is full of bling, and it's not very good bling. If it's good bling, I don't mind, but Dubai, it's tacky bling. Thank you. Please.
It's been really, really interesting, but throughout, you didn't discuss the sound, and of course for musicians, the quality of sound that you get in each hall is very, very important. I assume you spent a lot of time experimenting with sound. Would you like to talk to us about it?
I'm sorry, I can't hear the questions from here. Can you repeat that, Louisa? Or?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
First of all, we very much enjoyed your excellent, what you've had to offer. But as a musician, I'm very interested to hear about sound, and I wondered, I'm sure you spend a lot of time experimenting with sound, but for us, that's the most important. And what kind of controls did you have over that?
I think sound and acoustics is a field that has changed hugely over the last 30 or 40, 50 years. And people have found ways of varying the acoustic environment of the room. This is a classic horseshoe concert hall, parallel side walls, high flat ceiling, quite a bit of volume. This would be a very, very good room for recital. One of the reasons I can't actually hear you very well is for speech. It's a little too live and reverberant. It would be much easier for a session like this, amplified speech, if there were a lot of curtains hanging in the room, absorbing some of that sound energy. So today, there are devices we can use to vary the acoustics of the room. We can make a room which is really quite dry and very suitable for the crispness and precision you need for speech. But then you can make the room much richer for the orchestral repertoire for the big orchestral repertoire. Does that try and answer your question? We'll talk afterwards over coffee. If there's no more questions, we should go and get coffee and we can talk then. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.